So how do we assess today? We take individuals' behavior or performance, and we take a little sample of it by means of applying a questionnaire or a test. And please note that when I ask you to fill a questionnaire, I'm observing your behavior in a very specific context, filling a questionnaire context, right? So it's still just observation of a fraction of your behavior. Very artificial one, right? It's not your everyday behavior to fill the questionnaire. It's a very artificial bit of your behavior. And then, of course, when you use a test, you have all of those negative aspects of testing that you guys probably are well aware of, and you spend a lot of time at work fighting those. You have cheating, you have cognitive biases, you have misrepresentation. People try to appear better or worse when they take many tests. You have tiredness, stress, you have the fact that the situation is very artificial. And then what you do with the result of the test or the questionnaire? You take it and you estimate some traits, some low dimensionality traits, right? People are pretty complicated animals. And then what we do with them, we reduce them to their IQ, to 5 personality traits, and maybe few additional dimensions. And why do we do it? We do it because we want to predict the future behavior, future performance. Like how good of an employee this guy will be, how successful he will be at selling stuff or writing software or whatnot. You must admit that it's kind of a very complicated cycle here. And there is a lot of places in which we are losing information. We are losing information here because the responses to the test are made in an artificial situation. It's a small fraction of person's behavior observed in an artificial environment. We are losing a lot of information here. We had a personality questionnaire, neo-PR, 300 questions. We reduce it to few scales. All this information is contained there is reduced to few scales. Why? Because our computers here, they do not work well with problems of high dimensionality. If I want to describe a person to you, and I will describe this person using 150 dimensions, you will get lost after 5 or 6. You just cannot process so much information at once. It's not how our brains operate. But, surprise, surprise, computers can do it. So why not take the records of individuals' behavior, not while filling the questionnaire, an actual behavior, what you do at home, what you do at work, what you do online, what you do on Facebook, what you do on LinkedIn, what essays have you written, what status updates you put online, and so on, and put a machine brain to it, not to estimate few artificial traits, openness, intelligence, and so on. Because this, at the end of the day, is not why you are testing. You're not really interested in this guy's personality. You don't care. You care about how this guy will behave at work in the future, or how to help this guy, or how to give him a relationship counseling, or how to help him to plan his career. And you use personality just as some kind of a simplified picture of how this person might behave in the future. Computers, and I will show you in a second how successful computers are, can skip this stage because they very nicely work with 150 or 1,500 dimensions. They have no problem with that. They can predict behavior based on the minute patterns that are completely not visible for human beings. Moreover, even those little computer brains that learn very slowly comparing with human brains, and are very limited in many ways. They don't have a benefit of emotion, but they also have an advantage of not having emotions and not just simply liking this candidate and whatever his IQ is, I want to hire him because I like him and I don't know why. Those computer brains, they can also learn from each other very easily. Your experience is limited. You will only learn as much as you can learn in your lifetime and from the people you are meeting. If I would ask you, for those who are like doing job interviews, if I would ask you, now go and hire someone from China, you'll quite likely fail miserably because you know a lot about Swedish people, you know a lot about European people, but you don't know much about Chinese people. So their behavior, what they say in the interview, your interpretation of it won't be as valid as if you would have spent lifetime hiring Chinese people. computers have an advantage of very easily sharing and exchanging information, and they can build a model that describes Chinese people from a given village and Swedish people from a given vicinity in Stockholm, and have a separate model for them from the people from Berlin and so on, and go to kind of a resolution and amount of data they work with, completely unachievable for human beings. Okay, but let's now talk about sources of data and places where you can collect this big data describing human behaviors. So I already mentioned online activities, but also games online. Games, I believe, will be a very important part of psychometrics in the future, because it's like an ongoing simulation of the real life. You can give people tasks that they're unlikely to encounter in their daily lives, stressful situation, moral choices, teamwork examples, and so on, and see how they behave. And again, I'm not so old, but when I started playing games, they were like, they didn't really look like anything real. Still, kids' imagination was making this artificial ping pong on a screen look very exciting, very real, and very engaging. Not sure if you've seen a computer game recently. I don't have much time for playing computer games, but they look very real. Like if someone walks through the field of grass, actually you can see that each piece of grass waving, and each piece of grass is different. It's just uncannily real. So, and because we make this situation more and more real, people can interact in those games with other players. They're also real people, just avatars of them. Then the hypothesis can be made, and there is a lot of research proving this point, that their behavior online will be a mirror of their behavior in the real life. So by observing this behavior, you can very nicely figure out how they'll behave at work. Moreover, the point here is that you don't have to invite them to the lab to play a game. Why would you do that? This is an artificial situation. Of course they will behave differently, and they will be very team-working individuals, never kill anyone, never cheated anyone online, and so on. Observe the gaming behavior in the last 10 years, just looking at the records of the games, World of Warcraft or whatever they played with. Sounds very unethical, sounds very scary, observing someone's games or someone's Facebook profile. I'll come back to it. Consume content, music you listen to, books you read. I can easily tell you when you invited me for the interview, oh, I read, Great Gatsby every evening, and Bible lies next to my bed. Those lies are very easy to make. But today we read books on Kindles, we read books on our cell phones. You can actually see whether this person read a book, right? It's one thing to put a Bible next to your bed. I'm not sure if you would hire someone who put the Bible next to don't misunderstand me, on his bed. But then the other thing is to actually see if the guy just read it page by page and spent a reliable amount of time on every page, and maybe made some comments, maybe selected some quotes. And then you can go back, since he actually started reading, and check everything he read. Misrepresentation becomes much more difficult. And you can learn so much more from it, because you see which books he skipped, which fragments he read quickly, which books he was coming back to a lot. What does it mean? I don't know. And I don't think that any of us would know how to interpret this kind of data. How to interpret that you read this book or the other book. How to interpret that you lingered a bit longer on a given page. Impossible to figure out. Maybe if you read this book yourself and it's a very popular book in your family, then say, okay, because my family is like that, if this guy read this book, he must be similar to us. It's a very good reasoning, very nice stereotype. Stereotypes are very useful. But if you look at the variety of books and content, websites, blogs, news websites, and so on that people can see watch online or consume on their devices, it's impossible to interpret this data. And now, surprise, surprise, computers can do it very easily, because they can observe millions of people usually doing the same thing, check how those people performed later in the task at school, how well they write their essays, and try to figure out how well this person will perform. A little digression here. It turns out that computers now are much more reliably scoring essays than human raters. Now think about literature. Literature, poetry, it's such a complicated subject. And you then ask a computer, can you please give me a grade for this student that wrote this essay? This computer knows nothing about poetry. Moreover, if you actually look at the method this computer is using, this computer knows nothing about how the essay should be actually written. It doesn't know what the person wrote. The computer cannot interpret an essay about poetry. He will not have a mental, I don't know if I should call it mental, RAM or CPU picture of poetry or literature. But what computer does, it looks at some minute patterns. What words person were using? How long was the sentence? Was the comma placed here or there? Was this word close to the other word? So computer looks at patterns that look very stupid to us human beings. How could you possibly grade a poetry essay just looking at the construction of the sentence? It doesn't tell you anything about what the person is actually writing about. And it turns out that computers are more reliably scoring essays than human raters. And I hope you know about reliability. You can very nicely check it. You can take 10 humans, let them score the essay, and then you will see that those human scores will be spread. Some people will give a high score, some people go a low score. This is a very unreliable scoring, right? And then you take a computer, and the computer will be exactly in the middle. Scary, but true. And maybe in 10 years, computers actually will be able to understand poetry better. OK, so what can you do with this tremendous amount of data? And I already mentioned you can read the essays, you can observe the behavior, you can wear your cell phone, and your cell phone is an amazing digital recorder of what you do. It has a GPS tracker, it knows where you are, it can listen to your voice. You can tell a lot about a person from his or her voice. You can track emotions. You can see how emotions change in certain situations. You can check whom the person is meeting, right? Because you will see that this cell phone now came very close to the other cell phone, and they're kind of traveling together through the space. Maybe someone went for a walk with a friend, right? So there's also a lot of secondary data. So you don't only read emails of the person, but you can also infer a lot. Like you have two pieces of information, one person, the other person walking together. Hey, maybe they know each other, maybe they actually talk with each other. Hey, let's analyze the tone of the voice. Then we can figure out what emotions are between those people. Amount of data, amount of reasoning is completely beyond humans. Computers easily can analyze that. By the way, MI5 in UK is doing exactly that. They have the map of all the people moving around. Well, actually not people, cell phones. They have a map of all the cell phones moving around UK. And then they have flagged some people who are like some cell phones who are suspicious. And then if you happen to be close to this cell phone too often, they will also flag you. So there's a kind of a propagation of being flagged. So then if you happen to travel to work on the same bus with a guy that is suspicious, then you also become suspicious, but then your wife becomes suspicious and your kids become suspicious. Well, it's a very spooky but also successful screening method that, well, in England, I hope it's not used against the best interest of people, but then think Iran. And I'm also running again in direction of ethics, but let's leave it for later. Advantages, actual and not self-reported behavior. If you can behave consistently in a given way for years and years and years, maybe it's just you, right? We all put masks on our faces all the time, right? It's a very difficult question, who am I? Who am I really, right? We change and adjust our behavior. But it's very easy to tremendously change my behavior only for the sake of the interview with my prospect employer. It's very difficult to change my behavior on Facebook for last 4 years, or in an online game for last 10 years, and so on. And if you're able to do it for last 10 years in your gaming environment, I hire you anyway, because I hope you will continue doing the same thing at work. Potentially reaching far into the past, you can also see how the person evolves and whether he's not making stuff up. Dynamically updatable models. You develop Big Five. There are some tests. There are actually some tests. I will not mention names. There are some tests still in use that were developed 50 years ago. And the scoring methods didn't change, the interpretation of the results didn't change, the feedback didn't change. People 50 years ago were completely different. They understood sentences in a different way. The culture was different. The meaning of the question was different. Good example, we don't have to actually go back. Let's see differences between countries. An extroverted girl in UK behaves very differently from an extroverted girl in Malaysia. They're both same extroverts. They behave in a very different way. You cannot use the same test. Exactly the same thing with time. You cannot use the same test today as you used 50 years ago. It simply will not work. It won't be valid. The advantage of analysis like that is that they update automatically. They observe behavior, they train themselves, they make themselves better all the time, which means that they're getting better, but they also follow what's happening in the population. And of course, we are skipping the level of traits. We don't have to think about personality, we don't have to think about IQ, we can actually go and predict actual behavior. And now let me give you some examples of predictions that can be done with big data. This was done using Facebook likes, so I just asked 7.5 million people to access their Facebook profiles and give me the likes, and 40% of them said, yeah, why not, and gave me access. This, of course, completely anonymous, but those are the results. The very similar results can be achieved using browsing logs. And please note, I'm using a very limited scope of data here. I'm just using likes from Facebook. I'm not using your status updates. I'm not using your places. I'm not using your web browsing history and so on. I'm just using one little piece of information out of so many. And I'm using relatively simple models, to be honest. It's not also science fiction what's happening here. Gender, very easy, 93% accuracy. By the way, this number means if you give me a male and a female, and you ask computer to figure out which one is which one, this will be the accuracy. Gender, well, actually pretty obvious. Girls and guys, they behave in a very different way, so it's easy to distinguish between behaviors. But look, gay and lesbian, 88% for gay. Political views, 85% accuracy. Race, 95% accuracy. But then I tried to predict some kind of less or more elusive things like drug use, drinks alcohol, smokes cigarettes. I didn't have data about their performance at work. I didn't have data whether they steal printer paper or not. I didn't have data whether they are good at selling stuff or not. So I couldn't predict that. But I had many other pieces of information. And actually, I'm missing one thing here, which is basically, so someone said, oh, no, actually, I'm not missing it. So someone said, OK, single or relationship, this relates to a given person. Actually, as you can see, the accuracy is relatively low. And I have a hypothesis why it is relatively low comparing with your race, for instance. It is because single versus in relationship, it's not fixed. It's not written in stone. It changes. Whereas Facebook likes, they accrue over a long time. So what is ignored here completely, it's temporal distribution of the signal. I'm just taking your whole Facebook likes. I don't care where you like the thing, and I'm analyzing it. It's a very simple approach. It's not using, the fraction, even the smallest fraction of what's potentially available now in terms of technology. Still, you can predict a lot. And someone joked and said, OK, this is easy because this relates to an individual. Try to predict something that doesn't really relate to this individual, relates to someone else. And I said, OK, I know whether this guy's parents were divorced at 21 or not, because there was one questionnaire when I was asking about it. And look, the accuracy is kind of small, but you can still figure out, simply by looking at Facebook likes, whether your parents were divorced when you were 21 or not. Some linear traits, personality. You have reliability of the actual personality questionnaire here in red. So this is kind of the accuracy of the personality questionnaire. This is accuracy of my Facebook prediction. Usually around the half of the accuracy of the prediction of the personality questionnaire in terms of openness, actually very close to the accuracy of the real questionnaire. And now, one little remark here. Who said that when I measure personality, I measure actually something that has sense, that makes sense? Maybe computer is not very good at predicting personality because it's such a virtual concept based on a made-up, human-made questionnaire that kind of predicting this stuff is very difficult. And the best proof for that, take a personality questionnaire, big 5 personality questionnaire that is said to be a best descriptor, best simplification of human behavior, describing the person in its totality, allowing to predict future behavior. You hire people based on their big 5 scores. Take this and try to predict whether they use drugs, alcohol, smoke cigarettes. Try to predict some other traits of themselves. You will be doing very, very badly. The accuracy will be much below anything you can achieve simply based on actual levels of behavior. Are you guys spooked a bit about this? That you can take your Facebook, that Facebook knows whether you're gay or not? Even with you don't explicitly say it. Because of course, if you join like, you know, I love being gay, like on Facebook, then okay, it's not, you know, like I'm not an Einstein to figure out that you are gay. But the thing is that only, I guess, well, only like, this is a sample here of 200,000 people here. Only like 1,000 or less than that, like 700 of those guys actually liked being gay officially. Most of them didn't actually like it. They liked certain music, they liked certain books, they liked this and that. And just looking at those little minute patterns allows me and Facebook and anyone else, think your internet service provider, think your government, think your web browser, which also records everything you do. All of those people know whether you're gay or not, and what's your IQ, and what's your openness.